Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
How's everyone today?
Better.
You know what we didn't focus on this morning in our Haftarah reading is that although that Jehoash repaired the temple, the high places were not taken away. There was still sin going on, and the king didn't deal with it. Our Parasha today is Mishpatim. The name of this week's Parasha, Mishpatim, is one of the three different kinds of mitzvot, the three different kinds of commands which we find in Torah. Actually, in this Parasha, even though the name is Mishpatim, we find some of it, all three kinds today. But what it seems like to me is that recently that much of our Torah is about Torah. Have you noticed that? We've been at Mount Sinai, and here we're talking about Mishpatim. Well, does that indicate how important it is to Adonai? I think that it does. It does indicate that it's very important to Adonai, and I'm going to give you additional evidence for that in a moment. But the word mishpat, singular, comes from a root meaning to judge, and it's frequently translated as judgments. This category of mitzvot includes such things as commandments to give tzedakah to the poor, or in the 10 words, the prohibitions against theft and murder. Those are all mishpatim. A second time of mitzvot is the choke, plural chukim. And this is the type of command which we see represented in the kosher laws. We see in the mixing of fabrics, in the mixing of seeds, and also in family purity, the laws of Nidah. For these particular ones, Adonai gives no explanation. We are to accept them without questioning. So we're not to ask, why am I not to eat pork? We just say, yes, Father, we won't eat pork. The third category is Edah, plural Edot. And the name here comes from the root word ed, meaning witness. Edot are commandments which are spiritual or ritual commands, such as putting on tefillin, wearing tzitzit, blowing a shofar, and eating matzah on Passover. So those are some of the examples of Edot. The word mitzvot, which we use regularly, the singular is mitzvah, means command. And it's a synonym which we use to represent any of these other kinds of commands. So if we say mitzvot, we're talking about, could be any one of the three kinds which we've just mentioned. Now we come to Psalm 119. I'm pretty sure that all of you out there have read Psalm 119. It's the longest psalm. In fact, it's the longest chapter, I think, in all of the scriptures. It's called an acrostic poem because it's divided into groups of 8 lines, and each one begins in Hebrew with the same letter of the alphabet, and then at the next 8 lines begin with the next letter in the alphabet, and it continues that way all the way through. Well, this is a very important psalm. What it does is to focus on Adonai's Torah, and it includes words which relate to the love of or the obedience of Torah. I don't know whether you picked up on that or not. But it's important that we understand what we're reading, and to be able to do that, we need to understand the Hebrew words that are being used in this psalm. Have you ever stopped to think about that as you read it? What was the underlying meaning was? Well, to be able to read this psalm and understand what's going on, first we need to begin to understand that Torah means teaching or instruction given to us by Adonai, which is his instructions to show us how we are to live in relationship with him. I think we all understand that. We all know that. The next word is derek, and it means way or path. The path of life as we follow Adonai. Then we have Devar. Devar means word, Adonai's word. And this word is unusual. It's kind of like the word Shema here, which has a second meaning of obey. So in the same way, Devar also means both to understand and to do. Once you understand, then you're expected to do it. The next word is Mishpat. And then we have also Edah, choke, and Mitzvot, which we've already mentioned. We find all of these in this psalm. The final word is Pikudim, which is usually translated as precepts. And what we understand here is that these are Adonai's core principles. So look at those words right there. We're going to read the first section of Psalm 119. I want you to listen to it, but at the same time, look on the screen and see what is being said in Hebrew. Aleph. Blessed are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the Torah of Adonai. Happy are those who keep his testimonies, who seek him with a whole heart, who also do no injustice, but walk in his ways. You have commanded that your precepts be kept diligently. Oh, that my ways were steadfast to observe your decrees. Then I would not need to be ashamed when I consider all your mitzvot. I will praise you with an upright heart as I learn your righteous judgments. I will observe your statutes. Never abandon me utterly. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that as you read Psalm 119?
Yes.
How significant is it that the writer of this psalm uses these 8 terms, and probably some others that I didn't get, but he uses them many, many times throughout 176 verses, all talking about being obedient to the ways of the Lord. Now, the writer of this psalm is not named, but many do believe that it was David. We know that David has been described as a man after Adonai's own heart. So if it was David, shouldn't we also seek to have the same heart?
Amen. Amen.
So I encourage you all, when you get home, to read all of Psalm 119 with the understanding which you have learned today. And then see if it intensifies your desire to be obedient to Adonai and to Yeshua. You know that if we lived in the days of the tabernacle or the temple, we would have to be knowledgeable about each one of these mitzvot. And today we also have to be knowledgeable about those which are possible for us to obey. Now we stress again that this has nothing to do with salvation. Many people get stressed out about that. But it has nothing to do with salvation. But here's what it does have to do with. It has everything to do with sanctification. You recognize that word, sanctification? Meaning to be set apart for Adonai's purposes. Sanctification is a goal for each one of us. Adonai said, "Speak to all the congregation of Bnei Yisrael and tell them, you shall be Kedoshim, for I, Adonai your God, am holy." In other words, you are to be holy, for I am holy. That's sanctification. We find in 1 Peter 1:16 that Shimon Kifar reminds us that we too are to be holy. And then he quotes these same words from Leviticus 19:2. So in the face of all this scriptural evidence, how can we believe anything else? How can we? In past messages, we have described Yeshua as the living Torah. That thought is based on John's words. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Greek word translated as word here is logos. I think you all know that. But one of the definitions by Strong's Concordance for logos is expressing the thoughts of the Father through the Spirit. Well, the question is, what are the thoughts of the Father, if not His Torah, His teaching and His instruction for us? And as the living Torah, Yeshua was very likely the author of Torah. Here's a question. If Yeshua created everything which was made, would He not also create Torah? I think He would. And His words in Matthew 5 also show us that He is our interpreter of Torah. Yeshua said, "Do not think that I came to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Amen, I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or serif shall ever pass away from the Torah until all things come to pass." Now, many people think that to fulfill means that because Yeshua perfectly kept the law, we don't have to. But then again, most people don't know that abolish and fulfill are Hebrew idioms. I know you know that. Abolish means to incorrectly interpret, and fulfill means to correctly interpret. Yeshua came to correctly interpret Torah. If He had done away with the need to keep the law, then verse 19, which says, "Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches other the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, this one shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." If that was the case, that would make no sense. It would make no sense whatsoever. Well, we do know that Yeshua, as the interpreter of Torah, did further explain certain commandments. And He did this many times by saying, "You have heard it said, but I say unto you." Some of those which we read in our Shlichim portion today are difficult to understand. And if you just read them, you don't really know what he's talking about. And we need to, at some point, go back over those again. But I'm going to talk about a specific one today. Yeshua is clarifying one of the Mishpatim in Torah. And it's a mishpat which causes a great amount of discussion. It does not happen to be one of the Mishpatim found in our Parsha today. This is it. Suppose a man takes a wife and marries her. Now, if she doesn't find favor in his eyes because he has found something indecent in her, he is to write her a certificate of divorce, hand it to her, and send her out from his house. Well, by the time of Yeshua's generation, the rabbis and the teachers had had ample time to dissect this verse, and they put their own spin on it. In the generation right before Yeshua, the two leading houses of Torah study were the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. But they were very different in their interpretation of that verse. Hillel was extremely liberal, and he interpreted this Hebrew word, ervah, indecency, as being something as small as burning her husband's supper. He could divorce her if she burned his supper. Shammai, on the other hand, said that indecency referred to either adultery or sexual immorality. Now keep these two houses of Torah study in mind as we consider Yeshua's encounter with some Pharisees. Pharisees came up to Yeshua, testing him and saying, "Is it permitted for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all?" That any reason being if she burned his supper. What they were trying to do was to determine whether Yeshua would favor Hillel or favor Shammai. "Haven't you read," he answered, "He who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate." But that didn't satisfy them, and so they added another question. They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and put her away?" Now you see, get there, the Hebrew word, bill of divorce, is still in use today in Orthodox Jewish communities. And it is carried out by the Beit, the house of judgment, the court of their community, and it is binding on the members of the community. And so it's done in the way that Moses did it. They have to write it, a sofer, a scribe writes it up, and when it's properly signed, then the divorce is granted. Yeshua said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Now I tell you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery." So as we said a moment ago, the Pharisees were asking Yeshua if he agreed with Hillel or if he agreed with Shammai. And we do see that his answer was very close to that of Shammai, who only allowed divorce for adultery or sexual immorality. But Yeshua took it even further. He narrowed it down even more. So the question is, what did Yeshua mean by his statement here in verse 9 that you will see on the screen? Well, I think that it's very difficult to understand Scripture by just reading it in a language that it has been translated into. We have to dig a little deeper, and we have to look into the actual language in which it was written. The interpretation which I'm going to give you today is based on the study of one who spent many years studying the Synoptic Gospels. And I'm speaking of David Bivin, one of the authors of the book, Understanding the Difficult Words of Jesus. He's a member of the Jerusalem School of Synoptic Studies, a study organization which has been in operation for more than 50 years. Bivin actually has been there more than 35. His book, which I just mentioned to you, which I read in 1983, was one of my first ventures into understanding Jewish things. And it had a big effect on me. And I actually got to meet him in 2003 when we visited a Messianic synagogue in Jerusalem. The interpretation of Yeshua's words in Matthew 19:9, which you will hear today, is his. So now let's repeat this verse. Now I tell you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. We have to look into the language here. The Greek word translated as and is kai. K-A-I, kai. And this is the whole crux of the matter, that such a small word could make such a big difference.
Amen. Yes.
The Greek kai and the English and have the limited meaning of and. We all know what and means. But Yeshua was very likely teaching in Hebrew, and the word that he would have used is vav. You see that on the screen? I didn't put it up there, did I? There it is.
Yes, up there.
You notice we're talking about the letter vav, which is pronounced vav. Unlike kai and vav has a wide range of meanings. And it includes then, because, therefore, since, while, but, and so, and possibly other things. And it is called the vav of purpose. The vav of purpose. And we can demonstrate this by looking at Exodus 7:16. Adonai is speaking to Moses, and he tells him to say, you are to say to him, Adonai, God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, saying, let my people go, so they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, you have not listened. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
The vav of purpose is translated in this verse as so. And then we can see this in the word ve'ya'avduni. Ve'ya'avduni. You see the vav right at the beginning of the word?
Yes.
So they may serve me. Well, it could have been, and they may serve me, but that wouldn't make much sense, would it? So you will also find the vav of purpose in Genesis 14:23, Genesis 42:18, and Exodus 30:21, and probably others. But I would encourage you to look these three scriptures up in the Hebrew and see if you cannot see the vav of purpose and the way it is translated there. Well, we see something similar in Luke 16:18. everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Now, Yeshua would likely have said, if we consider the vow of purpose, everyone who divorces his wife so that he can marry another is committing adultery.
Oh, yeah.
And so would have been the vow of purpose.
All right.
Well, then what about Luke 16:18b, which says, and he who marries one who is divorced from a husband commits adultery? The question is, would Yeshua have condemned the marriage of the divorced woman and her next husband to be living in adultery? If you take this verse at face value, the woman must remain single or she will enter into adultery with her new husband, and she will also cause him to sin. David Bivin and Shmuel Safrai, who is also from the Jerusalem school, propose another possibility. It is called the Hebraic doublet, saying something one way in 16:18a, and then saying the same thing in a different way in 16:18b. And the psalm that we talked about today, Psalm 119, has an example for us. I will meditate on your precepts and regard your ways. Do you see that? The same thing is being said two different ways. The psalmist is essentially saying that he will keep Adonai's Torah. Well, with that in mind, let's consider Luke 16:18a and b as being a doublet. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and any woman who divorces her husband and marries another commits adultery. Well, it's a doublet with a caveat. And the caveat is that they are divorcing in order to marry another. According to this understanding, we know that Yeshua is not advocating divorce. I won't go through the whole thing again, but we read what he said in Matthew 19:4 about them being created in the beginning, male and female, and therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate. So it is clear that marriage is to be permanent.
Amen.
Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. And Yeshua also made it clear that divorce was only for sexual immorality. But in the case of sexual immorality, that is, when a divorce was clearly just to be able to marry another that he or she desired above the current spouse, Yeshua made it clear that those doing that had committed adultery. But the innocent spouse was not made into an adulterer if he or she remarried. Well, that's something you consider in prayer. It's hard to know how to interpret, but we have to interpret Scripture. And the fact that it was written in Greek and then translated into English and so on and so forth, maybe sometimes something is lost. But there is an understanding there. But when the original Hebrew or Aramaic speakers have their thoughts represented in Greek, and then it's translated into a third language, we have problems. We have the same problems in Spanish. We have the same problems in German. We have the same problems in Italian or any other language. But we do have to understand them. We clearly have mitzvot. We have commands in both the Tanakh and the Ketuvim Plikim, which are binding upon us today. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. Consider the question, what is sin? According to Yochanan, John, it is lawlessness. Everyone practicing sin also practices lawlessness. Indeed, sin is lawlessness. The question is, what is lawlessness? Is it Torahlessness, the violation of Torah? I strongly believe that is what John was saying. And that's what all that we've talked about today has alluded to, Psalm 119. John also said this, now we know that we've come to know him by this, if we keep his commandments. The one who says, I've come to know him and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God is truly made perfect. We know that we are in him by this. Whoever claims to abide in him must walk as he walked. We don't want to be liars. It's our own strong desire to be faithful, to walk in Yeshua's ways. And we must guard our hearts.
Yes.
Guard your heart diligently, for from it flows the springs of life. If we don't guard our heart, our spirit, and keep it attuned to Adonai and his ways, our physical walk will not be pleasing to him in accordance with what he has called us to do. We are to be holy because he is holy.
Yes.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.